Okay, well, welcome. So this is a conversation on small group process. And my name is Jenica Beatty. I am the Technical Assistance Manager with the Administration for Native Americans Western Region. I'm also joined by Prairie. Prairie, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, my name is Prairie Bighorn Blunt. I am a current ANA grantee. We have a SEDS grantee for Indigenous students that would like to have a mentor.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
So just quick housekeeping. We are going to drop an evaluation link into the chat box. If you could please take that, we always appreciate your feedback. And then feel free to drop into the chat box any questions you might have throughout the presentation. We will answer them as we go along. If you'd like to unmute yourself and ask any questions, you're welcome to do so. We'll also have a little Q&A session at the end for anything we haven't touched on. So the purpose of this presentation is to go through small group process, what it is, how to apply it, and really have some takeaways for you to operate within your own communities, possibly in person or even online. And then for the purposes of our discussion, small group process really applies to groups of about 4 people, maybe 8 to 10 people, really small but diverse groups. This might be your internal staff, it might be community members, it might be an advisory council, what have you. But really, you want to have an intersection of lots of different people's perspectives so that you can gain as much information as you can throughout discussion. So let's talk a little bit about that. When you get your group together, you're going to notice that there are different cultures being brought to the table. And in this, we refer to values, attitudes, and norms. So values are those things that you hold closely to yourself, things that aren't going to change throughout a discussion. They are what drives you, your passions. And so if you're talking about an internal staff group, you might all have the same values because you're working for the same company or same organization or same tribe. But if you are bringing in multiple community members who may not know each other, understanding their culture and the perspectives that they bring to the table is really important so that you can facilitate the conversation. So those values become attitudes, and the attitude is when they are perceiving other people based on their values. So their perception turns into their behavior, and those are called norms. So the behaviors that they exhibit will affect how they interact with each other. So this is from a fairly old study, but the concepts remain the same and relevant. They're tried and true. And when you deal with groups of people and their values and their norms, those behaviors, they're going to start exhibiting what is called small group roles. One person can have many different roles. They might go from a task role to a maintenance role to a non-functional role, all within the same conversation, within the same group meeting. And so it's important to understand what those roles are and how they work together and how you can mitigate some of the challenges they present. The first one is task roles. Those we're going to talk about next, then maintenance roles, and then non-functional roles. So task roles. These are the behaviors that are driving the conversation forward. So you might have somebody who is initiating the conversation. They're bringing up new topics. They want to propose actions and next steps. This kind of person is probably really straightforward. Then you might have somebody who is more of an informant. They are interested in research. They want things to be grounded in truth and facts. They might bring their opinions and their feelings to the conversation to flesh out topics of discussion. Clarifying roles are people who want to interpret ideas. They want to understand where people are coming from. They are the kind of person who wants to define any kind of terminology, so everybody is on the same page. Then you might have people who summarize things. If you're in a group setting and you are working with someone who often repeats what was just said, they might be a summarizer. They want to pull topics together, and they often find patterns and patterns of similarity throughout the discussion. So they're really good at drawing conclusions and providing solutions to problems. And of course, you always have somebody who's going to play devil's advocate. And that kind of person is going to do a bit of a reality check to make sure your ideas are feasible, if they're possible within your community. So these are all positive roles. And again, one person could have multiple behaviors that they exhibit. The next are maintenance roles. So rather than driving the conversation forward, these are often maintaining the conversation, feeding into the conversation. And so those behaviors could be harmonizing. This kind of person doesn't want to deal with conflict. They want to resolve conflict. They want to explore what makes people different and those different perspectives. A gatekeeper in a positive light is somebody who keeps communication open. They're the kind of person who reaches out and encourages somebody to talk. If somebody isn't speaking or hasn't had a chance to speak, they're the person who's going to say, hey, what about so-and-so? What do you think? So in a positive light, gatekeeping is a good thing. Gatekeeping can also be a bit of a negative thing, and we will talk about non-functional roles next. The next one is consensus taking. So this kind of person, again, is interested in getting everybody's opinion and ensuring everybody's on the same page. So they might stop the conversation in order to have people come to consensus, make a decision, finalize the next steps before proceeding. Then you have encouragement or encouraging behavior. This is important for everybody in the group. If you have a group, regardless of whether it's online or in person, if you have somebody as an engager who's always friendly, always smiling, willing to use their body language to keep a conversation open, that really helps to get the conversation moving along. And then compromising. Compromising is, again, kind of a peacekeeper, but not everybody can be a leader. And it's important to pull on those people when you're forming groups who you know to be compromisers, who can, admit that they've made an error or that they have an idea, but it can take a back seat to another idea if the group prefers that. Compromisers are equally important to leaders. And finally, we have non-functional roles. These roles occur when people feel insecure in the discussion. So this might be somebody who feels conflicted. Maybe they feel unsafe in sharing their opinions, or perhaps that they don't feel like they're being heard when they share their opinions. It could also be someone who has a close personal relationship with the topic being discussed, and it makes it more difficult for them to share their personal feelings. So the behaviors that you might see here are going to stop the conversation in its tracks. So you have aggression. So this is when somebody is attacking another person, possibly because they feel attacked themselves. So they put up a defense and they become aggressive. Blocking, similarly, is when somebody prefers to be stubborn or disagreeing on most topics because they don't feel secure in sharing or contributing to the conversation. Dominating is when somebody feels like they have to be in control. And honestly, I've experienced all of these non-functional roles. I have exhibited these behaviors before. And so I know it's that sense of like losing control can be coming from a sense of insecurity. So when you have somebody dominating, it could be aggressive domination where they are talking over people, or it could be controlling the group through flattery or other sort of subversive methods. So pay attention to that kind of behavior in your group in order to mitigate any problems. Out of field behavior is when people step back, they decide, okay, well, if no one's going to listen to me, I'm going to stop participating. And really it stalls the conversation because you want to get their opinion, you want them to participate, but they are just not having it. And then avoidance is the last one here. That's when people decide, okay, this is a touchy topic. This is something I don't feel comfortable sharing. Let's change it. Let's move on to something else rather than coming to consensus, forming solutions or identifying decisions. I'm going to ask Prairie, for all of these different types of roles, have you noticed this in your own work? Anything that stands out to you?
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the things that stands out to me a couple of things. One you just said is I can see myself doing a lot of these roles in different aspects in different work situations. Another thing that it kind of resonated with me, it might just be my personality, it might be the way that I was raised, but I sort of, the community that I came from, it was socially acceptable to kind of sit back and not speak up, kind of like give your opinion last. And I found that when I started working in corporate America, that was not the way that people worked. People like to say, hey, pick me, I've got an idea, let's talk about what I want to say. And so it was a little bit abrasive for me to kind of just be shocked that people were so willing to give their opinion. And I kind of had to adjust to my situation and kind of adapt a different type of a role depending on the situation that I was in.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that goes back to understanding.
But no, I think it's a good discussion. I'm looking forward to people's questions. Are we taking questions now or are we waiting for that, Jenica?
We can certainly take any questions now if you have any, and I didn't mean to interrupt you. Yes, so if you have questions, don't hesitate to unmute yourself. But what Perry was saying goes back to understanding the culture that you're operating in. If the internal culture of your organization differs from the external community culture, that might be something to address before the conversation gets started. So it's really important to understand these roles as you move forward, as you progress, so that you can sort of, again, address any challenges that the group faces.
Well, I think it sort of helps you realize that you don't take things as personal because you just say, oh, this is the role that someone is filling. And, it's not like, oh, she's talking so much, maybe she just feels like she has a lot to say and she'd like to be a leader in the conversation at that time.
Definitely. So with that, once you kind of have a sense of who is participating, how they feel about things, how they operate in a group setting, you can use responsibilities to, again, address any challenges when you're dealing with people and their different personalities, as well as achieve what the group is trying to achieve. And so those responsibilities could be anything, but we're going to take a look at just a few here. The first one is pretty straightforward. It's the recorder. This is the person taking your meeting minutes, reporting out to the group. And what's useful about the recorder responsibility is that if you notice people in your small groups who are disengaged, you can have them be the recorder, which requires them to pay attention. It's also a really good responsibility for someone who feels as if they're not being heard or feels timid and shy about sharing. So they can still feel as if they're contributing to the group because you've made them, you've given them a responsibility that is going to be really, truly participation based. So having them focus on what was being said, jot down notes, and again, if they are feel unsafe in sharing their opinions, as they're taking notes, they can jot down what they're thinking as well. So use these responsibilities, use the recorder to draw out people's weaknesses and strengths. The next one is timekeeper. This is a really good responsibility, especially when you're working in Native communities. We like to focus on stories. We like to tell stories and use personal anecdotes to highlight key points, but those stories can run the gamut and take time. And so in order to address everybody's concerns, all of the topics on your agenda, it's important to consider if timekeeping is needed. And so you can, prior to the meeting, set an agenda with the amount of time, establish who's going to be tracking the time, and let the participants know that the time is being monitored. This will help keep the conversation flowing and allow for you to move on to the next topic without appearing to be rude or inconsiderate. What's nice also about the timekeeper responsibility is if you have somebody who's dominating the conversation, who wants to be in control, this is a way to give them control without it detracting from the conversation. So it helps to mitigate that challenge. The next responsibility is the facilitator. And I imagine most of you coming to this conversation are thinking of being a facilitator, or maybe you are a facilitator. This position is meant to ensure that everybody has a chance to voice their opinion. They are a gatekeeper in that positive light, and they're also the encourager. But it doesn't always have to be you. I recommend that if you are setting up a group, that everybody gets a chance to be a facilitator. Again, this helps with people who have that sort of aggressive, domineering behavior, because they are required to let other people talk and engage with other people as the facilitator. It helps them to direct their, their personality in a positive direction. So do rotate that facilitator position around. It also helps to engage people who feel like they're, their voices don't matter, that they are not participating, they don't want to participate. As a facilitator, they're required to participate. They don't necessarily have to say anything. They can just call on people to keep the conversation flowing. And another one is the speaker. So speaker is the person who's going to report out to the community. They're going to be, talking to stakeholders, possibly presenting to your board members or tribal council. And so this is a really good position for, again, somebody who wants to be in control. Or on the flip side, it's a really good position to build strengths if you find that somebody doesn't feel confident in voicing their own opinions. It's a really easy way to develop that skill set because it's a smaller presentation. They're not responsible for coming up with any particular idea. They just have to stick to the key points, and it's less overwhelming. So if you know of somebody who's a bit more timid, and you want them to speak up more frequently, giving them this responsibility can help develop those skill sets. There's also a lot of other roles that you can do. Again, make sure everyone feels like they're participating, that they build stewardship over the conversation. You could have people who are looking at logistics. You could have people who are bringing snacks to the group meeting. You could have people who are in charge of the audio visual equipment, or if you're doing a PowerPoint. So there's a lot of different responsibilities that we aren't going to touch on here that can be included to make sure you are engaging your group. So also, it's important to remember, as I said with the facilitator, everybody should have a chance and every role should be addressed, but not one responsibility and not one role is any better than any other. This is an egalitarian process. Everybody's voices matter, and it's important that you as a facilitator or even just a participant are engaging with your small group. So that is a quick and dirty overview of what small groups are and what processes are involved, but what is the point of this? And for that, I'm going to turn it back to Prairie to talk a little bit more about how to apply this in a real world setting.
Thanks, Jenica. I turned off my camera because I keep getting a message that says internet unstable. Jenica, can you hear me okay?
I can, yeah.
Okay, perfect. I'll just keep my camera off. So what's the point? Thanks for the information, Jenica, but why do we need to know this? So I think a real world situation why this is important, especially for us here, people that are grant writers or grant recipients, is that a big indicator of success in your grant, the way you write it, the way you administer it, is if you have group buy-in. Like, is this idea coming from your community, or is this just something that you're thinking of might be a good idea and you just kind of want to throw it out there and try? ANA, as we all know, funds and supports well-documented, community-grounded projects. So one of the beginning phases when you're beginning to write a grant or you're thinking that a project might be a good idea is to sit down and talk with your community. I have a good example of me not doing that. A few years back, I was meeting with my board of directors at Able, and we were a few years out from school. All of us have graduated and we're into our careers, and we're sitting around a big table in Phoenix, and we're talking, we're milling over questions, and we're wondering what would be best for the students and what do the students need and how can we support them? How can we teach them the tools that they need to be tomorrow's business leaders? And we're talking, we're having hours of discussions about, all of these questions. And all of a sudden someone just said, well, why don't we ask the students? And everyone kind of, stopped and looked around like, yeah, why don't we ask the students? Like a lot of times we have questions or we have an idea, but let's just make sure that we're touching base with the community that we're trying to help. So when we're in Indian country and we're working, this small group process, I think comes in really, really handy because it's not overwhelming. You're not asking to have a huge community session where you have, hundreds of people come and where you're trying to manage crowds and where you're trying to manage an agenda and actually get some good data from a crowd. I think this gives you a good place to start. I think it's important that you pick the right small group, right? So if you've got a topic or you've got an idea in your mind that you want to talk about, find people that would have valuable input for the idea that you're trying to get information for. So I think that's important. I guess I can read the slides. I just went off topic with that, but it comes to mind every time I think about working with a small group is I just have that flashback of, talking about the students and what do they need. And then someone saying, well, let's just ask them. And believe me, they have so many ideas and they made the process so much easier for us. And so it's an important reminder for me to be inclusive and to always have people at the table when I'm trying to put together a project. Make sure that I have those people sitting at the table and I'm listening. I'm actively listening to what they have to say. Let's see, Jenica, I don't know how to skip forward. There we go. I think one of the things that comes to mind when I think about small group process is just this idea of long-term planning. I'm in nonprofit, Indian country, the nonprofit sector, and I have a small nonprofit, which means I'm always hustling and I'm always trying to figure out what our goals and our objectives are to keep the organization going. And when I'm overly focused on doing that, it's very hard for me to step back and say, what is the long-term goal of my organization? What do I ultimately want able to accomplish? What do I want to create within our communities over the long term? And a big piece of that, a really important piece of that, is getting buy-in and getting feedback and having the community create that vision with you. So this is sort of like the initial seed. This is the beginning, really the beginning phase when you're looking at long-term planning for your organization, is just to regularly meet with people. Do it in an organized way so that you have a way to document and to look back on the things that were said during the meeting so that you can kind of create a strategy going forward. As you get into it, the more meetings, the more, the more people you speak with, I think you sometimes start to see a theme and you can see, okay, this would work in my community. I've heard it from multiple groups, multiple individuals have told me that this is something they would like to do. And so you can make a mental note as putting that on your list of priorities for the future going forward. I think that sometimes in Indian country, we have challenges when we think about long-term planning because it feels like it's so far away, right? Like we're living today and we've got this year in mind, but next year we'll see what happens. I think COVID really kind of hit home for us, and it really kind of highlighted that aspect of, and it made us feel vulnerable because it's like, well, we don't know what's going to happen. I have a Native nonprofit and we work with students, and every year we have a big student leadership conference and it's in person. So in 2020, when all of this happened, we were geared up for an in-person event. We had to shift gears and figure out how to do it virtually for the next 2 years. And so it's kind of one of those things. COVID is kind of, it's throwing an extra monkey wrench in a challenge I think that we already had planning in Indian country. When I was reading a study for nonprofits a couple years back. This was pre-COVID, but I think it rang true. And it was talking about succession planning when you have a nonprofit. And one of the largest challenges is that leadership sort of operates under this assumption that, no, I will always be the head of my nonprofit or my organization, because that's what you're doing, that's what you're passionate about. And the idea of, having someone come behind you and carry on the work and, create or change the vision that you have is sort of painful, and people kind of cringe at the idea. But that's something that's important when you're thinking about long-term planning is, how do we create these plans that are so rooted and so grounded in the community that I could be the executive director and we could do this, or someone else could be the executive director and we could do this. And the only way that you get there, the only way that you can get comfortable with sort of letting go of the reins a little bit and even thinking about succession planning is knowing and being confident that your idea, the goals, the things that you want to accomplish within your community are true community needs and are valued by your community. And I think that when we can step back and do that, I think that it helps us to kind of let go a little bit and say, all right, well, I'm not going to be here forever. I'm not going to live forever, but I do want this community to have the benefit of what I'm creating now, here and into the future. So it's just something, I know it's a difficult topic, but I think that it's something that we do need to consider in Indian country is just thinking about planning into the next 7 generations, right? We've all heard that. We all know a variation of that to be true within our communities. So it's something that's true within our DNA that we are planners. We are people that want to have a good plan for our children and our children's children, going forward. So how do we step back into that? How do we be comfortable with that and not operate from this place of scarcity, right? Because a lot of times when we think of scarcity, it's like, I don't want someone to take my job. I want to be here. I want to be doing this. I don't want someone else to do it. But how do we step back and how do we be comfortable in our roles and in our place in our communities to say, hey, I believe in this work. I love this work. I'm passionate about this work. But if there comes a time where there's someone else needs to do this work, I can support that. And that's it. That's a stretch. I get that. But I think that that's my goal, is to create a nonprofit where I'm staying in touch with my community and I'm understanding what they need. And I'm also enabling leaders coming up within the organization and around me that can carry on that vision and that can make it better. Because really at the end of the day, like our students and our youth, they have their own dreams and their own visions for their community. And so how do we train them? How do we include them in the process so that they can own it, buy into it, own it, and then, run it for us someday? So really that's the goal of long-term planning. And I think for Indian country, it's very culturally appropriate that we start to have those conversations. Did I lose the group? Are we still, is everyone still with me? I can't tell. I keep getting a message saying you have bad internet connection, so I'm a little nervous. But Jenica, do you want to skip forward?
Sure. And you sound great. Thanks, Barry.
Okay. So I think this is our last slide. And we've kind of already talked about it a little bit, but it's just problem solving. When you're in a group and you have different opinions that come up, how do you work through that without making people feel like your opinion isn't important, or your opinion, your voice doesn't have a place at the table? One of the things that our students have struggled with a lot is that corporate America is trying its best to be as inclusive as possible at this point, right? Like we've seen great strides in Indian country, where we have been sending our students out. They've been sought after. I will say that they've been sought after. And one of the things that I tell our students is that when you get to the table, make sure you make your opinion known, because that's why you're coming to the table. The idea, the value of group process and group think, and the small group process specifically, is that you get the opinion of all kinds of people. So if your small group is coming up with the exact same opinion, the exact same ideas, the exact same way that they want to attack something, you might want to step back and make sure that everyone is feeling comfortable that their voice is being heard. Because sometimes the louder voices are the ones that are heard, but as the moderator or as someone who has a task role within a group, you can help your group stay on task, and you can say, you know, hey, I haven't heard from Jenica. What do you think about this? And then make sure that you're giving everyone space, and you're giving everyone the respect. People aren't interrupting, people aren't shooting ideas down. You know, you want to make sure that's a respectful environment so that those people that wouldn't necessarily voice their opinion, that they feel comfortable doing it in that space. And I think another thing that you can do to help with problem solving is make things anonymous. Like if you have to come up with if you're voting on a specific idea or solution, you know, you can ask people to vote anonymously, and then they don't feel like, hey, I'm hurting someone's feelings, or nobody likes me because they didn't vote for me. It kind of takes out that personal aspect where you could get offended. And so I think that's something that is really useful and a good takeaway from this. I have found, just in my personal opinion, that when you give people space and you engage with them and you assure them that what they have to say is important and it's valuable, that people do like to contribute and they do have something to say. They do have an opinion about a topic. But when you kind of steamroll things and you don't give people that organic space to talk about what their idea is in a supportive environment, the people that are more shy or that maybe just don't even want to waste their time. Like, I feel like sometimes we get to that point where you're like, I don't even want to say anything because you're not going to listen to me anyway. So make sure that your small group processes don't end up in that pothole where you could have some really amazing, outstanding ideas coming from the small group if you let everyone have a chance to speak. I can't tell if there's any questions, so I'm just going to go forward. Oh, look at that. I'm all done. Ready for questions. Does anyone have any questions? I specifically want to ask the group, like, what are your thoughts about like succession planning or using small group process to help you build out a vision that's like really rooted and grounded in your community? Is that working for you guys? Are you guys doing it? Like, I'd love to like hear some discussion or some questions around that, or anything, any kind of questions.
So I do have a question here. How soon in advance should you begin succession planning?
Well, how long are you trying to stay? No, I'm just kidding. Well, it really depends on your vision, and what your start today. Like, I'll just say it. Start today. It's a good thing to have on your mind. You know, from day one is, I'm building this. This would be a good person that I could train to help me and that could possibly take over things when I'm, you know, have to step away. Life is short. We don't know what's going to happen. And when you're working in Indian country, most of us are blessed with jobs that we are passionate about. And, you know, you want to make sure that someone is being trained, maybe two people. I mean, you want to make sure that someone is capable of taking over the reins and making sure that the community's vision and the community's needs are being met. So even if it's uncomfortable today, start thinking about it. Maybe start having discussions with your community about, what does this look like? How is this appropriate within my community? But it's not too, I don't think it's too soon to start. Start today.
Anyone else? Feel free to unmute yourself too. You don't have to type in the chat box. So this one says, we are currently working on a project within our tribal government and have a team of 9 motivated women. The team inputs are so valuable and this topic resonated with us. Oh, it's great to hear. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, Francis? How have you engaged 9 people? How has that been for you?
Sure. So we are working within our tribal government. I think a lot of tribal entities are very similar, is that some of our policies, procedures, and everything is outdated. So previously within our tribal government, we've been tasked with this wonderful project of updating historical records and creating a new manual for this. So previously within our tribal organization, a lot of input from stakeholders was not something that was previously done. So this project has been really incredible, where everybody's input has been captured, and they're so valuable and they're so motivated. I'm so honored to work with them. So I love all of these plannings, and I do agree with some of the roles are so important. So I just really appreciate the topic that you brought on.
Well, thanks for sharing. And it sounds like having a group of 9, women focused on one task, you have that shared value. So it's really easy to kind of get the culture together, and you're not addressing too many challenges if everybody's on the same page.
Yes, one interesting topic, I think what the speaker did indicate was that as culturally women, if you're a younger person, we stop, we respect our elders, and even if we don't believe in it, we stay silent. So I can see that changing, but that is definitely a hurdle to go over in our community, is to being respectful and adding input, your valuable input. So that's one thing that we notice, because there is a big generational divide within our group.
Very interesting. Prairie, do you have some of that in your?
Yes, specifically, Frances, thank you so much for sharing. I remember when I got my first job, my dad kind of pulled me aside and he said, don't ever speak first, always be the last one to speak. And if no one said your idea, then go ahead and say your idea. So I came to work in Washington, D.C., straight out of school, being very quiet and very reserved. And if you've ever worked in DC, or you've been, in a corporate setting like that, that's not how you roll. If you're not speaking, if you're not pick me, I've got something to say, people assume that you don't have anything to say, and you're kind of viewed as less valuable in those situations. And that's something that I learned the hard way, I would say. I will say this though, when I am in a tribal setting, when I am home in my community, I understand how things work there. And so I kind of switch gears, and you want to be appropriate in all situations. And that's something that we tell our students, is that in corporate America, when you're working, in a large company, the dynamics there are different than they are in your community. And so pay attention and try to adapt. And it's interesting because students don't feel comfortable in those spaces a lot of times, because it's so different than what they're used to growing up. But it's really important for us. It's important for us to model that behavior for them and let them know that, hey, it's okay. I get it. When you live and work in DC, you have to talk first. You have to say your idea. Sometimes you have to, advocate for your own idea. But when you come back home, that might not be the most appropriate way to handle yourself or to present yourself. So it's delicate, and it takes some just emotional intelligence to get through those situations. But I think that once we figure that out, I think we can do it. And I think we have another hat that we can wear, and we can be successful in a corporate setting, a tribal setting, an entrepreneurial place, or wherever we choose to be at that moment. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Thanks, Prairie. We have a comment here from Allison that says, I love the small group process to build consensus around very important issues like family group decision-making, peacekeeping, courts, advisory groups, etc. So thank you for that comment. We appreciate your feedback. And then a question here, do you have any tips for holding focus groups online or virtually? I'll say very quickly that when you're working online, you lose all of that body language that comes with working in person. So I'll ask Prairie, do you have any tips and tricks to share that you've used at Able?
Honestly, no, it's hard. It's hard to keep people engaged. I think that the more I did the ANA pre-application, and to me that was one of the, or not pre-app, the post-award training. And Rondell did a great job of asking people questions and kind of keeping people on their toes. So it kept me engaged. She had like little chat boxes that she had you put your answers in, and she was, you know, kind of like talking one-on-one to people. So I think any way that you can draw people into the topic, you know, go for it. It's tough. It's difficult. I think we're kind of, if we haven't hit it, there's like a Zoom burnout that we'll hit here eventually, but just try to stay, you know, connected to your audience and engage them as much as you can.
Definitely. And I'll piggyback on that. For our trainings, for ANA, when we do trainings, we do try to incorporate a lot of that engagement piece, so that people feel like they're not just sitting there listening to a lecture. We really want to encourage discussion. The trouble is when people don't know each other, and it depends on the type of focus group you're holding, but if people don't know each other, they don't feel like the ice has been broken, and they don't feel comfortable unmuting themselves. Even in this conversation, people have been typing in the chat box versus unmuting themselves to ask questions. It can be a bit daunting, especially when you can't see people. So it makes it a bit more difficult. The other thing, like Perry said, was that burnout. So perhaps shorter discussions over a longer period of time versus, you know, one meeting that lasts 3 hours can help prevent that burnout. It also helps people build a rapport with each other because they're meeting more frequently. So if you had a group that was meeting every 3 months on a quarterly basis, it can be really difficult to break the ice every single time. But if they're meeting more regularly, maybe once a month or even once a week, they can start building friendships and a rapport, and you can start to learn people's voices so they don't have to say who they are every time they start talking. So there's a lot of tips like that that can help kind of get the conversation going in an online setting.
Jenica, Kirsty put something in the chat box, which I think is a good idea too. She just said, a technique I'm finding helpful in the virtual setting is to begin the conversation with a quick check-in question, and that brings everyone in. And then at the end, close with a checkout question, helping everyone to end with their voice as well. I love that. I'm going to try to use that myself because I think it's a good kind of way to round out and make sure that everyone is staying plugged in and engaged in the whole meeting. So thank you for sharing that.
Prairie, can you hear me?
Yeah,
Yes.
Go ahead, Tina.
Hi, Jenica. We do a lot of small group work for our Healthy Native Communities Partnership, and we've done a lot with virtually, and I think it really helps I like the small group because we have done small groups and all the way to 80 people like today. How do you do group work with that? But for a small, we usually put them in breakout rooms, like on Zoom rooms or breakout rooms. I think that's what they're called. And having them do conversation in pairs, like doing conversation in pairs, and then bringing back to the main room and asking, you know, what was the highlight of your conversation, whatever the question was asked. I think we've done it several times, and it has worked several times. So that was my suggestion. Thank you.
Thanks, Tina. That's a really great suggestion. And that really makes use of those roles that people will exhibit. You might have, when you do those breakouts, a different facilitator in each breakout room and a different speaker who's going to come back to the table when you bring the group together and report out. So good tips.
Yep. Thank you.
Anyone else? Questions, comments, tips and tricks, things that have worked for your organizations? If not, just as a reminder, and Rondell dropped the survey into the chat box again, we really appreciate your feedback. It helps us in the future to tailor these conversations. If this is something of interest to you, but we want to delve into a different topic around small groups, we can certainly do that too. Just let us know. But we appreciate everyone's time. All right, if there's no more questions, you guys are free to take off. Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Prairie.
Hi, thank you.
You guys did great. Thank you.